Have you ever wondered that narcissism could be more than just a personality disorder? I've wondered that lately, and I've been looking at it and thinking, yeah, I think there's more going on there with narcissism in those individuals that seem to they're having trouble changing. Could it mirror the patterns of addiction? Well, that's possible. We see that substance abuse and gambling, those patterns are very similar to what we're seeing with narcissistic personalities. I'm glad you're here with us today. I'm Dr. Pt1, and this is part 1, Unmasking Narcissism as an Addictive Behavior, and we're in our series of Unmasking Narcissism. Before we start, let me take a couple of minutes just to share a little bit more about my first book, Unmasking Addiction. This work advances a truly holistic model of recovery, one that refuses to reduce addiction to just a box, to just a singular dimension. It's expanding it. It's talking about it or addressing it in a behavioral and symptomatic way, not just the person, but the person and the spirit. The person and the identity, the spirit, soul, and body, encompassing all those areas. And we're addressing that in the book Unmasking Addiction. The heart of Unmasking Addiction is grounded on the conviction that sustainable recovery requires integration, not just a focal point of let's focus on this one thing. We've got to integrate the whole part of who that person is in order to achieve that goal of healing. Emotional wounds must be understood and healed, and you can't just address emotional wounds by addressing what happened. You have to address the whole of the person and how that person is affected by what happened. Cognitive distortions must be identified and corrected. The body must be restored and strengthened, and the spirit must be renewed and anchored in truth. Addiction is never merely a chemical dependency. It's often intertwined with trauma, shame, false beliefs, relational fractures, and spiritual disconnections. Therefore, recovery must be equally comprehensive. So to learn more about the book, please visit unmaskingaddiction.org or purchase your copy from Amazon or Westbow Press, the publisher. And I appreciate that attention on that. Well, getting to the subject today, unmasking narcissism as an addictive behavior. It's so interesting working with narcissists, and of course they don't come into counseling voluntarily. Usually it's they're compelled to do so by some particular reason. Sometimes they're court ordered, sometimes they're being dragged in, and other times they're using counseling to manipulate someone else. Or there's a point where some of them do get depressed and they need a little pick-me-up. And so they come to counseling for 1 or 2 sessions, they get a pick-me-up, and you don't see them for a while again. Maybe you don't see them at all. Narcissism is beyond a personality disorder, is the bottom line of what we're talking about, in my opinion. Addiction, it's part of that addiction framework, and we have to look at it in that way if we're going to help those individuals with narcissistic personality disorders. The hidden addiction of the false self is like a split image showing a mirror reflecting a distorted self-image on one side and chains symbolizing addiction on the other. In Unmasking Narcissism as an Addictive Behavior, we're exploring the fascinating and narcissistic life of that personality disorder that they don't see because it's a false self that they see and want us to see. Yet that false self is creating all kinds of problems, one way or another. In some cases, it's helping, but there's always that downside, and you want a go-getter to be leading in some areas, but sometimes those go-getters that lead don't know how to stop, and they end up crashing everything in the end. These traits often reflect compulsive need for admiration, a dependency on external validation, and an insatiable craving for control. All hallmarks of the addictive cycle as well. So we're starting to see a link there in the behavior. Drawing parallels between narcissism and addiction opens a whole new realm of understanding. And again, it's, in my opinion, I haven't read any research. Well, I've read research material on the various subjects, but putting it together, you don't see much about that. And as I'm looking at it and putting it together, I'm recognizing, wait a minute, there's a connection there, and that connection is neural. It has to do with the brain wiring, you might say. It has to do with all the similarities of addiction, whether drug, behavioral addiction, because even the drugs, it's affecting the chemistry in the brain. The behavioral addiction affects the chemistry in the brain as well. Narcissism is like a behavioral addiction. Drawing these parallels between narcissism and addiction opens that whole new realm of understanding. How does narcissism mirror traditional addictive behaviors, you have to ask? What psychological and spiritual insights can help us unravel its complexities? And we're going to be looking at some of that today. Can this lens of addiction lead to better ways of healing and restoration? Better ways of helping someone who wants help out of that, or better ways of coping with someone who is in that difficulty of narcissism? So to do that, we have to understand addiction a little bit. So we're going to just kind of touch on it, understanding the core mechanisms of addiction. And the core mechanisms, we can just kind of boil it down to compulsion, loss of control, and negative consequences, because that's what it basically is. With addiction, the brain's reward circuitry loops repeatedly. The chronic compulsive pattern of dependence on a substance or behavior driven by neurological reinforcement, chemistry, wiring in the brain, and psychological need. I need more of whatever it is I need, in which a person persistently seeks relief, reward, identity outside of healthy regulation, outside of what's normal, and ultimately outside of God, despite harmful consequences. From a psychological standpoint, addiction is a maladaptive coping mechanism in which a person repeatedly turns to a substance or behavior to regulate emotions, escape distress, or fill unmet internal needs. Doesn't that sound like narcissism? It sure does to me. Over time, the behavior becomes a conditioned behavior, which is triggered by cues, stress, and emotions. A reinforced behavior, which temporary, needs relief, needs pleasure, needs reinforcement. An entrenched behavior, forming dependency. It's sort of like, on a very shallow scale, as I was speaking, I was thinking, going to church on Sunday. Well, what do you typically do on going to church on Sunday? You typically sit in the same general area. Some people want to sit in that same seat, and woe is you if you sit in their seat. But why do we do that? Well, we do it because we're conditioned to do it. We do it because it reinforces our feel good. We do it because we've now become dependent on sitting in that same general area. And so we're comfortable sitting there. Try sitting in the opposite end of the church this Sunday and see how you feel. It's going to be similar to brushing your teeth with your other hand tomorrow morning and seeing how you feel with that. So what do? You want to go right back to doing it the way you're familiar with, the way you're dependent on. And narcissism is going to be very similar. That behavior, they're dependent on it. It makes them feel good. It fills that need of power and control and whatever else they may need. So we've got to look at that and combine it and recognize there is a neurological loop that's occurring, a conditioned thing that goes on in the brain. The dopamine-driven reinforcement. What's dopamine? Well, it's that feel-good chemical. Those chemicals that make us feel good, norepinephrine, epinephrine in the brain, neurochemicals, they stimulate, and that's a feel-good. So dopamine-driven reinforcement loops, reward-seeking behavior. And when that occurs, the narcissist dopamine-driven reinforcement loops, which is reward-seeking behavior, becomes a self-perpetuating system of identity regulation. This is what works for me to feel good, and it loops. So they keep looping in it. It's triggered, it's an automatic. It's not intentional because it's become automatic. They become conditioned to it. They're not thinking about it. And because they're not thinking about it, they don't see what you see. It's self-perpetuating system of identity regulation where external validation substitutes for internal stability. What I'm getting from the outside makes me feel good on the inside. Therefore, I need what's on the outside. I'm getting validated by what's on the outside. I've lost my sense of who I am on the inside because now it's based on what I'm getting from the outside. That pursuit of admiration evolves into compulsive addiction-like cycle, addiction-like behavior. And it's temporarily soothing. Deep-seated shame can occur. It was soothing the deep-seated shame that can occur and ultimately intensifying emotional emptiness and relational dysfunction. So the narcissist begins to equate attention as worth, admiration as safety, control as safety and stability, and validation as identity. This is who I am. I'm getting validated. I don't have to get validated every day because I know who I am. You know who you are. You don't have to get validated every day. It's nice if we do, but if we don't, okay. But to them, that's like looking in the mirror and seeing something terrible and awful because they didn't get that validation. And this creates a closed loop system in which the self must be constantly fed by external stimuli. Gee, doesn't that sound like addiction? Doesn't that sound like taking drugs or drinking too much or gambling or whatever else? Impaired executive functioning is in the mix there, and that's reduced impulse control. To the narcissist, impaired executive functioning, particularly reduced impulse control, becomes a self-authorized license to act without restraint, a defensive strategy to guard the fragile self, the false self. And cognitive distortions or thinking disturbances, perception disturbances that reframes dysregulation or how I'm feeling as justification, therefore perpetuating relational harm and resisting both clinical and correction and spiritual transformation. And that's a mouthful. Basically, it's I feel good because I'm getting what I want. Not really what I need, what I want. Tolerance then comes up with addiction, addictive behaviors, needing more to achieve the same effect. To the narcissist, tolerance becomes an ever-expanding sense of entitlement. We hear that word so much, entitlement. And we all get entitled at times, especially teenagers are always entitled, and that's a phase of narcissism we all go through, as we've spoken of before. But we're supposed to grow out of that. We're not supposed to remain entitled, and yet the narcissist gets stuck in it. Entitlement where what once satisfied no longer suffices, and others are increasingly demanded to supply greater admiration, control, or emotional fuel. I need more from you because I'm building tolerance. So they may go up the ladder in, let's say, academia or in their work, their careers, but there's a point where they can't go any further. And to the narcissist, wait a minute, that's not possible. I need more. And then that's where the over-control occurs to get more, either where they're at or they're going to go somewhere else, certainly, either with you or they're going to find someone else. Withdrawal then occurs. Well, withdrawal is, we all feel that way when we don't feel good and all that. We just kind of want to sit back and everything, and that's distress. It's when the behavior stops. To the narcissist, withdrawal, distress, when that behavior stops. So they become or perceived a threat that's coming their way. They get all excited and they're dealing with it, but they're so fragile on the inside. That false self is so fragile. It unleashes a emotional dysregulation. That is, the emotions now are out of control. They're not regulated. They're not in that person's control. And they may get angry at those times. They may go do something at those times. They may get critical, condemning at those times. They may be shaming you at those times or highly sarcastic at those times. Whoa, they're withdrawing. And when you recognize it, you can see, oh, they're withdrawing. They need something. They need more. They need flattery. They need a pat on the back. They need words to console them. That's not a time to confront them, because that's only going to get worse. So therefore, addiction is not simply a failure of willpower. It reflects neuroadaptation or brain chemistry changes and learned patterns of behavior. So what we're talking about here is both thinking and behaving that need to change. Well, addiction is the same thing. Thinking and behaving need to change. Narcissism, thinking and behaving need to change. And from a biblical perspective, looking at it through that biblical counseling lens that we look at, addiction can be defined as a form of idolatry of the heart, where a person turns to something created to seek comfort, control, escape, or identity instead of God. Scripture frames this dynamic clearly in many places, but just looking at a couple of scriptures in Exodus 20, verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. In 1 Corinthians 6:12, I will not be mastered by anything. Addiction becomes a misdirected worship, a reliance on something finite to meet infinite needs. That is, you're not going to meet those particular needs. It's a worship at the altar of temptations. Imagine a dimly lit sanctuary, not of stone and stained glass, but of human heart. At its center stands an altar, not empty, but occupied. Upon it rests something small at first glance, a bottle, a screen, a secret habit, a fleeting pleasure. Yet it looms large, casting long shadows across the soul. What was once a simple object has been crowned, enthroned quietly over time, receiving attention, devotion, and sacrifice. Around this altar, imagine the atmosphere is conflicted. There are whispers of relief, promises of comfort, illusions of control, but beneath them, a deeper ache hums like a distant echo of something lost. The heart designed for divine communion now bows to something lesser, trying desperately to extract from it what only God can provide: peace, identity, rest, and love. Chains are present also in this imaginary depiction, but they're not always visible. They're formed from repeated choices, forged in moments of pain, loneliness, or fear. What began as refuge has become a ruler. The individual, once free, now circles the altar in ritual, returning again and again, not out of joy, but out of compulsion. The very thing that promised mastery over pain has become the master itself. Above this sense of this imaginary scene, however, there's light, persistent, patient, and piercing. It doesn't force its way in, but the light is revealing. It exposes the altar for what it is, a substitution, a misdirected worship, a created thing attempting to sit in the seat of the Creator. And from that light comes a gentle but firm invitation. You are not made to bow here. The true temple calls the heart back, not to shame, but to restoration, to tear down the false altar and reestablish the rightful throne. For addiction, in this sacred framing, is not merely a habit, it's a misplaced devotion. And healing begins not only with breaking chains, but with restoring worship to its proper place. Addiction and narcissism, very similar. Some of the characteristics, very similar as well, as we've already mentioned. Tolerance, escalation, withdrawal symptoms, dependency. It's a cycle. It repeats, it loops. In the addictive behavior cycle, substance use disorder and addictive behavior escalate over time. That cycle escalates. We could say goes faster and faster. Individuals require more stimulation to achieve the same effect. It intensifies. Over time, withdrawal symptoms and emotional distress occur when deprived, not getting enough, can't reach it, can't get it. Connect these features to behavioral patterns, and you can see that narcissistic personality disorder being exposed. Grandiosity, need for admiration, lack of empathy. Describing that narcissistic personality is like a person standing on a pedestal while others appear small beneath them. Well, we've talked many times about the characteristics of narcissistic personality. Let me just glance through them as quickly as I can. Grandiosity is that sense of self-importance, that need, that exaggeration on everything. Preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Belief that one is special and unique. Requires excessive admiration, sense of entitlement, interpersonally exploitative, lacks empathy, can't be sensitive to your needs, it's my needs, how dare you take you away from me. Often envious of others, in other words, they get easily jealous, and they show arrogance, haughtiness. Well, you only need 5 of those characteristics to be diagnosed with narcissism. Those are 9. Yeah, sometimes we have to be careful ourselves so we don't fall into that category. The pattern is enduring and inflexible, though. So it's consistent. It's not just every once in a while. It's all the time. It's not just situational. It's all the time. It leads to clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, and relational functioning. So you don't just see it at work. You see it at home. You don't just see it at home, you see it at work. You see it in relationships. You see it in play. You see it everywhere. And that's usually a good sign that there's a problem there. And whenever there's chemical imbalances, for example, let's say with, let's say ADHD, a lot of people are familiar with that. Well, that's not just going to be at home. And it's not just going to be in the classroom. It's not just going to be at work. It's going to be everywhere. So that addictive nature of narcissism involves craving for validation, dependency on admiration, and control as their intoxicating high. Power and control is intoxicating to the narcissist. Creates a loop, creates a chemistry change, a neurobiological change, the dopamine floods, and it's a feel-good. That's multiplied, however, if there's an addictive personality already within the person. And have spoken about this previously about addictive personalities, but basically that addictive personality is signifying that there's a gene in the body that's causing acetaldehyde to go into the bloodstream when it's not supposed to and get changed into chemical initial THIQ in the brain. That's a neurotransmitting chemical in itself, but it feeds the neurotransmitting chemical. It's a nutrient. It's a stimulating nutrient. And whenever dopamine or norepinephrine or epinephrine is secreted, it draws that THIQ, enhancing the feel-good. This just doesn't taste good. Oh, this is so good. This just doesn't taste, this just doesn't feel good. Oh, this is the best feeling in the whole wide world. So if that narcissist already has an addictive personality, then the power and control is intoxicating to a point of exhilaration for them, which makes it hard for everyone else to understand and to recognize why they're overreacting to practically everything. Our central thesis is that narcissism mirrors addiction. Admiration functions like a drug, absorbing glowing attention from others like energy streams. The arousal from power and control becomes an intoxicating and hard to give up occurrence. The narcissist's fear of ceasing to exist on the inside is a profound form of existential dread. There's a name for that. I don't even know if I can pronounce it. Thanatophobia. Thanatophobia, which means basically often manifesting an anxiety about losing one's identity, consciousness, or personal self. Wow, thanatophobia. If you've never heard it before, think about it, and maybe you'll remember it, but I'm not going to remember that word. The fear of nothingness. It can trigger a panic. It can trigger intense anxiety or a sense of inner emptiness. So anticipatory fears, anticipatory anxiety can come out of that. We're driven by validation. All of us are to a point. But the narcissist, that addictive part of them, they're really driven for validation. So constant need for praise, obsession with image, how they look, how they're coming across. External identity formation can occur, that looking for themselves, their identity in you. If you're reflecting it back to them, they feel good. If you're not, they have to fix you in order to reflect it back to them, which is why a narcissistic parent can be so toxic to the children who are not reflecting it back to them. And we've spoken about that previously. Like checking multiple mirrors endlessly, narcissists compulsively seek admiration. This is not a preference, but a necessity. How similar this is to addictive cravings? Well, we've just gone over some of that stuff, and I think you can see it's very similar. There's a contrast given to us in the Bible that tells us this: don't do anything for selfish reasons or seek to promote yourself ahead of others, but in humbleness and love, be more concerned for the welfare and good of others than for your own. You can find that in Philippians 2:3. I'm reading it from the Remedy version. Well, okay, we've said a lot about it. It's kind of like it's never enough. Increasing demand for attention is always there. Escalating behavior is going to always be there. If things get slow, they're going to escalate because they have to feel good, and you're not making them feel good. Risk-taking for recognition, it's always there. They're willing to take that risk. To them, it's not a risk, it's a necessity. Like the endless height of a staircase, the narcissist requires increasing admiration over time. What once satisfied no longer works. The Bible warns us of this danger by escalating pride. Pride goes before destruction, and haughty spirit before the fall, the Bible tells us. Well, as we said earlier, then what comes after all that? Well, withdrawal, yeah. Emotional dysregulation, or they're not regulating their emotions. They're out of control now. Oh, I'm feeling bad. Why am I feeling bad? It can't be me. It's got to be you. You're making me feel bad. The job is making me feel bad. The car is making me feel bad. Everybody's making me feel bad. It's not me. So you need to change. The car needs to change. The job needs to change. The boss needs to change. The kids need to change. They're blaming now at that point. So when you start seeing them blaming, there's a hint they're withdrawing. There's something's amiss. They're not getting something they need. And in counseling, we track back with that. Where's that origin? What is it that they're not getting? Okay, tell me what the problem is. Tell me what's happened. What has changed? Usually it's something that they're not getting. They need it. They're going through withdrawal. So rage or depression can occur. Sensitivity to criticism will occur at those times. Emotional instability certainly is there with that emotional dysregulation. To the narcissist, withdrawal symptoms occur when admiration is absent. They'll experience a collapse as if emotionally fading away. Narcissistic injury leads to anger and despair. Connect this with what it has to say in the Bible about spiritual disconnection that I'm going to read here. Filled with self-importance, the Bible tells us, they think God has nothing to offer. In their mind, God is irrelevant. They're confident that their me-first way is best. Your design laws make no sense to them. They ridicule all who are honest and kind. Those who oppose their selfish ways, they ridicule. They say to themselves, nothing can stop us. We'll succeed in all we do. Under oath, they lie and deceive. Their words inflame fear, selfishness, and division. They befriend the unwary. Without warning, they destroy the innocent. They covertly hunt for helpless victims. They are predators who sneak in the dark. They lurk in the shadows to ensnare the defenseless. They snatch the vulnerable and drag them off in their destructive web. Have you ever read that in the Bible? It's in there, Psalms chapter 10, verses 4-9. That's from the Remedy version of the Bible. That sure seems like it's describing narcissists, doesn't it? To you? It does to me. And perhaps a few other individuals as well. Denial and rationalization is in both addiction and narcissism. The addicted mind protects itself. minimizing harm, justifying behavior, blaming others. It's not me, it's you. You're the problem. Like a person wearing a mask while ignoring broken relationships behind them. Narcissists deny their impact. Rationalization protects the false self while ignoring broken relationships behind it. This displays a progression of self-deception. Each person is tempted, the Bible tells us, when they are deceived, pulled, and enticed by their own fear-based, self-centered feelings and desires. Then when the selfish desire is accepted by the will, it results in choices that deviate from God's design for life. And choices that deviate from God's design for life result in death. James chapter 1. Bible is fascinating. You should read it every day because you pick up on things every day, and you can read the same passage and suddenly the next day your needs are different, your thoughts are different, and you're getting something more out of that same passage over and over again. When you need an insight about something, go to the Bible, start reading it, because it's going to give you the insight to that particular thing, even though you may have read that same verse a week ago about something else and got a different insight. It's going to give you the insight for what you're looking at it at that moment. So narcissism and addiction impacts relationships, don't they? Addiction destroys connection. Narcissism destroys connection. Exploitation, lack of mutuality, emotional harm. Relationships become tools for supply, while one person pulls strings attached to others like puppets. Narcissism's addictive behavior exhibits an absence of true love and empathy. If you know someone who has an alcohol abuse problem, drug abuse problem, gambling problem, sexual problem, any type of addictions, you see the same thing there, don't you? Addictive behaviors that exhibit absence of true love and empathy. What does the Bible say there again? Oh, love is the principle upon which life and health are built to operate. And when active in intelligent beings, love is patient and kind. Love gives in order to bless others and doesn't envy, boast, or promote self. Love isn't intrusive, rude, selfish, irritable, or hot-tempered. And love doesn't hold grudges or keep a record of wrongs. Wow. Addiction does that. The alcoholic, the drug addict, etc. We see that in the narcissist as well, don't we? We see those connections. It is connected. Identifying narcissism as addiction becomes easier and easier as we read into it more and more and see those fine connections, repetitive behaviors, escalation cycles, functional impairment. The diagnostic markers reveal a striking pattern: repetition, escalation, withdrawal, denial, and functional impairment. These elements don't operate in isolation, but form an interconnected sequence that closely reflects established addiction models. Much like the clinical checklist mapped onto a cyclical process, these features illustrate a self-reinforcing behavioral loop, one in which the individual becomes progressively entrenched, repeating patterns that intensify over time. It doesn't get better, it gets worse. And in getting worse, it resists awareness of it. And there's more disruption, more dysfunction as a result. More problems, in other words. So the underlying roots we see in behavior theory, We see it in cognitive distortions. We see it in the psychodynamic conflicts. In the behavior roots, we see it's shaped by rewards. Addictive and narcissistic behaviors persist because they're reinforced. How are they reinforced? Well, they're reinforced through pleasure, relief, attention, or control. Then the maladaptive thoughts, the distorted thinking, the wrong thinking, those maladaptive thoughts justify and sustain the behavior. Addicts think, I need this, while narcissists think, I deserve this. I'm superior, or I'm superior. And then there's the psychodynamic conflict of the unconscious conflict. Deep, unresolved emotional wounds, shame, trauma, insecurity drive the need behind their behavior. So if we put it together, there's unconscious pain that creates a need. There's distorted thinking that justifies the behavior. And there's reinforcement that locks into a habit. And once a habit is formed, it only takes, I think, 23 days to turn it into a compulsion, reinforcing it. And once it's a compulsion, if it can turn into an addiction, it's going to turn into an addiction. Break those bad habits, in other words, as quickly as you can before they get so strong they become unbreakable. Well, that reward system that we were talking about, that neurological loop, the dopamine reinforcement, the reward circuitry, the habit formation, reward pathways reinforce narcissistic behaviors similarly to substance addiction. It's as if a glowing neural pathway showing repeated activation in the brain. It's as if it's glowing in there because it's getting stimulated. And in that spiritual perspective is the root of the false self. Pride and self-exaltation, separation from God, need for transformation. Narcissism is a spiritual disorder rooted in pride. The biblical call to humility and the transformation is the cracked heart, turning toward light, breaking through the darkness. There is a path to healing, and certainly it takes a lot of work and it takes a willingness on their part. However, if you're working with one, or you're a partner to one, or you have one as a parent, well, being aware is helpful. Helping them to become aware gently, lovingly, kindly, slowly may be useful. It may work, and they may respect you for it if you're doing it in a loving, kind way, respectful way, while still patting them on the back, giving them that little bit of reinforcement that they need. So breaking the cycle for them, it's awareness and accountability. It's emotional healing. And it's spiritual renewal. They need all that. A modality of treatment approaches involves counseling, truth confrontation, spiritual surrender. How do you get a narcissist to surrender? You can't. In fact, they can't either. They need God's help. God creates circumstances to occur, to motivate, but then they still have to choose. Okay, I've had enough. I surrender. And that's the falling. That's the breakdown. That's the hitting the bottom, finally. Oh, doesn't that sound like addiction, doesn't it? 12-step, got to hit that bottom before you can call on God for help and reach out. They have to hit narcissists have to hit that bottom as well for that surrender to occur. Replacing the false self with the authentic identity in Christ is like immersing oneself in the light of truth, love, and freedom, thereby breaking that cycle. A new lens for understanding must occur. Narcissism as an addiction. If we understand it that way, we can see how we have to approach it perhaps differently than we've approached it before. It's an integrated healing approach, and there's a hope. I woke up this morning okay at first, and then started grieving, and okay, I let myself grieve a little bit. Then I got to get out of it. It's time to get ready and go to work, or get ready to come and do the recording. How do I get out of it? Well, okay, I got to think less about me. Why am I so moody now? Why am I feeling so down? I wasn't this way yesterday morning. Oh, well, wait a minute. Okay, now I got to change my thinking. I have to look at it a little differently. Oh, something great's going to happen today. God's got something great planned. I bet that devil, he's trying to get me down. Okay. Well, I'm not going to let that happen. I don't want to call in sick. I don't want to stay home. I need to go so that great thing can happen today, whatever it might be that God has. I may know what it is. I may find out, or I may not, but God's got a plan. All right, I need to get going. I'm not going to let the devil get his way. I'm going to get ready, get up, get ready, go do. Well, we all have to kind of do that every once in a while, but sometimes when things are going on like grief, well, okay, that wave hits you, you've got to dispute it. And that's what we have to do. And the narcissist has to learn to do that for themselves as well. In essence, admiration becomes the drug and control becomes the high. The narcissistic system is not random. It's reinforced, learned, and neurologically conditioned. The addiction isn't just for admiration. It isn't just protecting the fragile self from collapse. The behavioral parallels with addiction and obsession, escalation and withdrawal, denial and rationalization are not just traits. They're addictive behavioral loops. The result is relational destruction, similar to families impacted by substance addiction. At its root, narcissism isn't just psychological. It's spiritually disordered love of self over God and others. So if we view narcissism as an addiction, changes everything. Moves from labeling to understanding. Increases clinical clarity and compassion. Opens pathways for structural intervention like addiction recovery models. And emphasizes the need for deep transformation, not surface behavioral change. Recovery isn't just about managing image. It's about dismantling the false self and restoring the true self. Narcissism, when understood as an addiction, reveals a powerful truth. The narcissist isn't just controlling others. They're enslaved to a cycle of self-preservation through validation. And like all addictions, what promises power ultimately produces bondage, until truth, humility, and transformation intervene. Narcissism mirrors addiction. Emphasize that this understanding can help someone else, can help you, or can help your partner, or your mom, or your dad, or whoever. We need to help them to understand there is hope. So this morning, when I changed my thinking, I had hope. I may not see God's greater good in the day, but I'm hoping it's going to happen. Somebody's going to get blessed. Something good is going to happen. That's going to get me going. Do the same thing for yourself every day, even if you're not a narcissist, and examine your heart, seek truth, and pursue healing. Well, I hope this was helpful for you today. just a reminder, give us a thumbs up or subscribe if you haven't subscribed before, so you'll get these automatically. And that helps keep me motivated and keeps us going. Next time we're going to talk about part 2 in this section of identifying the narcissism as an addictive behavior. May your troubles be minor, blessings more, and happiness come through your door. God bless you.